the We Knew the Moon podcast, where we love all things empath, spiritual, witchy, unexplained, and spooky. Hosted by me, Dee Safier, co-founder of the Goddess Temple Twickenham, and joined by lots of special guests. Hi, everyone. This is We Knew the Moon, and my name is Dee, and this is where we like to talk about all things empath, spiritual, witchy, unexplained, spooky, and creepy. This is the official podcast of the Goddess Temple Twickenham, goddesstempletwickenham.org. And I'm really excited about this season, season 4. We've got a slightly new format where if you sign up to any amount on our Patreon website, then you have access to unedited full video episodes from season 4. So that is on patreon.com/We Knew the Moon. Some of you might recognize I've got Michelle with me. Hi, Michelle.
Hi, Dee. Hello.
You are one of our regular guests here on We Knew the Moon, and I always love when I've got you to come along and do an episode. So, Michelle, you are an illustrator. You're amazing. You do all of my graphic design work because I just think you're absolutely fabulous. Why don't you tell us a little bit about where we can find you?
My business is called Heartfelt Illustrations, and you can find my website at www.heartfeltillustrations.com, or I'm over on Facebook and Instagram at Heartfelt Illustrations.
I'll make sure I put all of the links in the show notes, so do check it out. Even if you're not looking for any graphic design work, your stuff, Michelle, is just so freaking cute that, like,
thank you, Dee.
Whenever it comes up on my feed, it always makes me smile. So yeah, if you just want a bit of feel-good factor, then do check her out. But also, you've got your little sister company, your sister branch, don't you? Why don't you tell us about that?
I have Agnes Audette, again, at Agnes Audette on Facebook and Instagram. And that sort of covers the more sort of witchy things that I design and draw myself and illustrate. So stickers and things like that. So yeah, do pop over, have a look, say hello.
You are covering
Friday 13th.
Friday 13th. I don't know about you, but I kind of love Friday 13th.
Do you know, it's been really fascinating and wonderful. I've done so much research, and actually it really has. I am really looking forward to the next Friday 13th, and I'm going to tell you all about that today.
All right. So I'm going to hand over to you.
Okay, so like I said, today I'm going to talk about Friday the 13th. And when we hear Friday the 13th, especially in the UK and other Western cultures, we immediately start to think of all the negative connotations around it, don't we? It's said to be unlucky and dangerous and spooky, or even a day that should be avoided entirely. And so ingrained are these associations that, like I just said, like me, none of us can actually even remember when we first heard about it, or actually why people say, oh, Friday 13th, and we're all supposed to be scared. None of us can actually remember the reason why, can we, Dee?
I've actually heard not loads, but I've heard a few different theories about where that stemmed from. So I'm interested to hear whether any of them are true or not.
Right. Yeah, truth. Oh, yeah, that's always a dodgy one, isn't it? But did you know it's got a name? Fear of Friday 13th actually has a name, and it's called paraskevidecatria-phobia. I'm having to read that off of here. I'll say that again. Paraskevidecatria-phobia.
Okay.
Yeah.
Decatria, I'm guessing, is Latin for 13th, and I'm sure Friday is somewhere in there.
Yeah. It's the parabit. Paraskevi.
Friday in some language. I don't know.
I don't know. But did you know also there's up to 3 Friday 13th in a year? So usually there's 1, but there can be like 3. And this year we've already had 2.
Ooh, are we having another one this year?
No. The next one, when I'll be having a Friday 13th party, it's going to be Friday, January the 13th, 2023.
All right. I'm coming to your party.
Yeah. You come to the party. I'm going to be having a good day, and I'll tell you why. So it's up there with loads of other superstitions, isn't it? Do you know any other ones, Dee? Any other superstitions?
Well, the last episode was on superstitions. So
yes,
with Sarita. So she talked about quite a few, like walking under a ladder, black cats. Yeah, you know, a lot of the common ones, things like touching wood.
Touch wood, yes. Or people touch their heads as well when they say touch wood.
Yeah, so we covered a fair few ones that, some of them we discussed were clearly a safety element. Like walking under a ladder just seems like a silly idea safety-wise anyways, right?
So like you said, some superstitions, they've got good reasons behind them, haven't they? But actually some of them don't make any sense at all, or they don't appear to. It's enough to believe something to make it real for you. So for lots of people, fear of Friday the 13th and a lot of these other superstitions is real because they believe it.
It's almost like self-fulfilling prophecy, right?
Yeah, confirmation bias, really.
Yeah, exactly.
In the case of Friday the 13th, if you believe it's an unlucky day, you will find and see all the reasons to confirm that, i.e. it's confirmation bias. So you'll be like, oh, it's because it's Friday 13th.
You'll remember the bad things and associate them specifically with the date, whereas far worse things probably happen to you on other days, but you don't associate it with, it's because it was, Tuesday the 27th.
No, and you're more likely then to go tell your friend that you fell on Friday 13th, for example, and then confirm it to yourself and confirm it to them. And on it goes to the point where we don't always even recall why we think this or what the origins of all these things are. It becomes shared. Now, Friday 13th has become quite infamous over the last few decades, actually. It's been, there's been the movie Friday the 13th.
There's been hundreds of those movies. It's a franchise.
Massive hit, wasn't it? So that sort of feeds into that confirmation bias.
Great film. The original is such a perfect film. If you like horror, which I know you don't.
I'm not keen, so I've not seen it. But then there's things like the Da Vinci Code, the book and the film, again, feeding into that confirmation bias. It covers the fear of Friday 13th. And in this occasion, it sort of equates it with the Knights Templar.
Yeah.
There is a tentative link to things I'm going to come on to later.
That's one of the things I've heard.
Right. So in 1907, there was actually a book written by an author, Thomas Lawson, a thriller again, and he called it Friday 13th. And it was sort of about the events that unfolded on that day. So just these three themselves have confirmed that bias in the general population over the last century. And actually, because we've got this fear of Friday 13th, it's actually responsible for a huge loss in business revenue and retail revenue every single year. People are so superstitious that they might not shop, they won't fly in planes, some people won't go on boats, people won't get married. Friday 13th, really rare people get married on that day or baptised or will have elective surgery or they won't sign documents. People won't buy houses. They won't go to the theatre. So you can imagine how that affects business generally and revenue.
Yeah.
And actually some shops, knowing this, that people have this fear, go to the extent of actually offering discounts on Friday 13th. So they might have a sale on Friday 13th just to incentivise people to make those purchases.
So a lot of tattoo parlors will do a Friday 13th flash sale where they have flash designs, which are the ones that are already pre-made and fairly simple, normally Friday 13th related or superstition related, so like cats and the number 13 and stuff like that. And you normally pay, it used to be back in the day, actually you paid £13 for a tattoo, but now it's just significantly cheaper than what you would pay on any other day. So I wonder if that's for the same reason that people won't get tattooed on that day normally.
Right. Or maybe they're using the confirmation bias in a positive twist to offer those kind of tattoos. But I think like aeroplanes will offer discounts, maybe some shops do 13% off, things like that on those days. Because people literally won't do those things on Friday 13th.
So what you're saying is save your holiday for Friday 13th if you can, so that you can get a discount.
Even if one aeroplane had an accident on Friday 13th, that would be it. Everyone would assume then that it was because of Friday 13th.
I think a lot of people, it's not whether they believe it or not, but why not just avoid the risk?
And there's only 1 to 3 days in a year where this can occur. So it's not like you have to worry about it all year round. It's very rare anyway.
So I can imagine people that don't necessarily count themselves as superstitious, because a lot of people who touch wood or whatever would not say they were superstitious, them thinking, well, if I can book it another day, maybe I will, just in case.
Exactly that concept, exactly that. So where does it come from then, Dee? So what do you reckon?
Well, so the thing I heard, some of you might know that I work in the charity sector as well. And one of the charities that I worked for a long time and now work for as a contractor is St. John, who do the ambulance here. And I work for specifically the branch that fundraises for the eye hospital group that they have in Palestine. And you mentioned the Knights Templar.
I did.
Knights Templar still exists. It's a branch of Freemasonry, but it's actually not the same as the original Knights Templar. They based themselves on the model of the original Knight Templar, but it is a separate group. But I heard that back in the day when everyone was doing crusade stuff and all these different branches of knights and monks and hospitaller knights and military knights and so forth were all competing in the in the Holy Land and blah, 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 that there was an incident where a bunch of St. John Hospitaller knights killed a bunch of Knights Templars. And it was a Friday 13th.
I mean, that might be the same thing. I might, we'll come on to that one day. That's a good example of the confirmation bias of Friday 13th. But actually, the answer is twofold. It's actually about two fears. It's about the fear of Fridays and the fear of 13, combining a super fear of Friday 13th. Okay, so I'm going to tell you a little bit about negative connotations with Fridays and 13s, and then I'm going to twist it round a bit and I'm going to tell you
we can end on a high note. Yeah.
We're going to end on a high note. Okay, so starting with possible negative connotations with Fridays. So Fridays begin a weekend, don't they? They denote the change of a mindset from work to play, leisure, and the gateway to the weekend, aren't they? They're a point of change and transformation, usually, like we said, from work to not work for most of us.
Sounds great.
Fantastic. Yeah, Fridays are Sabbath days to Jewish people and to Muslims, and they're also really significant to Christians. So we know it as sort of Fish Friday, don't we? Mm-hmm. So the day that's associated with not eating meat in the Christian culture.
Which I know, even though a larger percentage of people would probably not identify as being Christian or at least practicing Christian.
Yeah.
But still, my partner, Paul, his parents run a fish and chip shop in the area.
Yes.
Still, Friday is their absolute busiest day. So even if people are not doing it for like a Christian reason or superstitious reason, or it was like a mini Lent, wasn't it? To not have such a gluttonous day.
Absolutely.
Even if they're not doing it for religious reasons, culturally, that is definitely still a thing because you can see queues round the corner on a Friday.
The same here in Yorkshire Day. Fridays is fish and chip shop day. Like you said, the queues go down the road, the local fish shops. It doesn't sound like a negative day, does it? But the fear of Fridays is often reported to originate with a few well-told tales and legends, though I think actually a lot of the truth in these are quite questionable. And I don't actually think that they explain the fear of Fridays enough. So the first one I've got here on my list actually is from the Old Testament. Adam and Eve were said to have been evicted from paradise on a Friday. again, from the Old Testament, it said that according to some, the great flood that Noah built his ark to avoid began on a Friday. This might explain a bit about the travelling thing, I'm not sure. And then this one really probably is the key one. Again, in Christianity from the New Testament, Jesus was said to have been murdered by the Romans on a Friday. So the Last Supper took place on a Friday, where, as we all know, Judas arrived and betrayed Jesus with a kiss on a Friday. And it said that he went on to die on Friday. So it must have been the same day, because that's Good Friday, isn't it?
Mm.
Again, I'm not sure if this accounts for the fear, though, Dee. But I've got some strange facts about Fridays as well, not just the terrifying ones. So, did you know that in Britain, in Great Britain where we are, it was customary to do public hangings on a Friday?
No, I did not know that they had a specific day for it.
Yeah, Fridays. So you might have gone to a public hanging and then round corner to a fish shop.
I mean, they feel contradictory.
They do a bit, don't they? Another strange fact is in the Middle Ages, the church referred to Fridays as the witches' Sabbath.
Oh, well, that's fun.
Now, that's fun and makes perfect sense a little bit later on. Okay, so that's about all actually I could find in reference to fearing Fridays or things that might have happened on a Friday. So at the moment, that doesn't seem like a great big fear to me. 13 then. Possible negative connotations with 13. So now this is by far a worse fear than Fridays, because people will and do work, travel, go about their business on Fridays without any actual fear. It's part of the working week, isn't it?
Yeah.
However, did you know many hotels, car parks, high-rise buildings and things, hospitals, don't have a 13th floor? When architects are planning them, they plan them without a 13th floor. They go like straight from 12 to 14, which I think that means 14 is the 13th floor, but...
Yeah, I mean, did they think they're really going to trick the devil with that? I don't know. And also, sometimes you have in apartment buildings, you won't have a 13th flat, or sometimes even on streets, you won't have a 13th house. It'll be like 12B or something, even if it's a standalone house.
True. And they plan them like that because people, again, like we just said, they won't buy a house that's got number 13 in.
My house number is 13, so...
Is it?
So I'm okay with it.
It wouldn't worry me, actually.
I wouldn't be like, oh, I can't buy my dream house because it's number 13.
Well, exactly. Yeah, you find everything's just perfect, but it's got number 13 on the door. And some people actually change it to a word instead of a number.
I do appreciate them doing it in hospitals for the reason that if you are superstitious, because I have a little bit of a phobia of hospitals too. I can't imagine if I had a phobia of hospitals and a phobia of the number 13, and then I found out, oh, I'm going to be having surgery on 13th floor or staying in 13th floor. I'd be like, right, well, I'm never coming out, am I?
Or bed 13.
Yeah. There, I think, okay, let's not worry some people more than necessary. But yeah, it is really strange, isn't it?
And it must be so shared in society that architects and planners will go to this extent to remove the 13 or to miss it out entirely. And again, there's some superstitions, stories, legends around the number 13 as well. So the first one is from Norse mythology. And it's a story of Balder, who was killed at a banquet by the mischievous god Loki.
All right.
Loki.
Yeah.
So Loki was said to have crashed a party of 12 people. He was the 13th guest. It didn't end well. Lots of people died. That story and legend is acquainted with the 13 being bad because Loki arrived and made the group up to a 13.
Right. So I presume there's some people who are like, oh, we can't have 13 guests at this party.
That's another superstition, not having 13 guests at your party or around a table. But does it sound a bit familiar to another story, that one?
The Last Supper?
Yeah. So in Christianity, Judas was said to have been the 13th guest. He arrived last. And as we know, he went on to betray Jesus. So again, association with the Friday and the 13. So some strange facts again about 13. Now, I think this might be your Knights Templar story. On Friday the 13th of October, 1307, King Philip IV of France arrested hundreds of Knights Templar, and many of them went on to be burnt at the stake. This is what was referenced, I think, in the Da Vinci Code, this kind of a story. And again, this one combines the fear of Fridays and 13ths.
If you're interested in anything to do with that side of history, St. John, the Order of St. John, which, it was the Crusader times. People were largely traveling on foot or on horseback or occasionally by boat or whatever. But it could take you up to 2 years to get from like Great Britain to Jerusalem.
Yes.
And so that's going to fuck you up physically, right? There was St. John, the branch of St. John, which were the Hospitaller Knights, who used to go along the route to Jerusalem and set up hospitals specifically for the pilgrims.
Along the way.
Yeah. And then the Crusaders, because they needed medical attention. And then they set up the hospital, which eventually in Palestine, which eventually became the Eye Hospital, which is what the branch that I worked for. And then when they got evicted from the Holy Land, they ended up going back to all their different home countries around the world. They were still members of the Order of St. John. They were still hospitallers. So that is why they got into doing healthcare related charity work in their home countries. So in the UK, for example, we have St. John Ambulance. In other countries, they do the hospices. A lot of countries like here, they do first aid training. But if you're interested in all that, there is an amazing museum, the Museum of the Order of St. John, in near Farringdon in London. And you can also find out a little bit about these links with the Knights Templar and so forth. Now, you might think as a Palestinian, it's strange of me to be talking in such high regard about Crusaders. We have mixed opinions of them in Palestine. We've had them for centuries in different forms and formats. But I really like the branch of St. John because they were these Hospitaller Knights. So they were setting up healthcare along the way. And what I really love is when they set up the hospitals in Palestine, they also allowed for treatment of the local population, which was not always the case.
No.
And one step further, because at the time, a large chunk of the local population was Muslim, they even had separate Muslim kitchens so that they could serve the locals halal food. And, so they were respecting their religious beliefs. They were crusaders, whether they set up hospitals or not. But their mentality was that Jesus could come back as any individual. So you have to treat every individual with the utmost respect. And that's an ethos. Apart from the Jesus-y bit, at least it manifests itself in a way where you're treating everyone with kindness and equality, which I definitely am on board with. Sorry, massive tangent.
No, that was super interesting, Dee.
I know, it's fascinating.
Maybe it needs a whole episode.
Yeah, and then, I've got a Knights Templar friend who I'm buttering up, grooming to get on the podcast to talk about this kind of stuff. Because then anyone who's been to Malta, St. John and all the other Crusaders eventually got kicked out of Palestine, ended up going to Rhodes for a bit, and then Malta, where they literally control the island. It was their island.
And it's on the flag, isn't it?
On the flag. If you go around Malta, you see it freaking everywhere. The St. John Cross.
Back to number 13 then.
Yep.
Some really sort of quirky associations with 13 next. So a baker's dozen is 13, isn't it?
Mm.
And the 13th one is supposed to be thrown away.
Is it?
Yeah. And throw away the crap one, which is the number 13, the last one.
Because I always heard that was just like, a dozen being 12. And then the baker just being nice and like, oh, I'll chuck in an extra one for you. But you're saying it's so that you can get rid of the worst one?
It's so that you can throw away the crap one. I think there's some sort of association with the devil. Like throwing salt over your shoulder to blind the devil. I think it's to appease. The number 13 is also associated with the devil, or the story of the devil, the Christian version of the devil, I should say. And again, a coven is said to comprise of 12 witches and the devil, making 13, the devil being the 13th one. And it's an odd number. It's a primary number. It's a rare number, isn't it? So theory goes then that Friday 13s combine all of these fears and quirky legends, creating a super fear. Is that enough to explain why people won't travel or get married? I personally don't think so. Well, actually, the answer isn't really anything to do with these little fears at all. And unfortunately, again, it's about the forced transition from pagan thinking to a patriarchal religious whitewashing, basically, Dee. So I'm going to tell you another little story about this.
I figured this would happen at some point in this story.
So in actuality, both Fridays and 13s were considered lucky by ancient peoples. So it's only actually the arrival of monotheistic patriarchal religions that changed this. And again, it was part of the strategic plan to break down, to absorb concepts from the past. But this particular one, was to get rid of, to dissolve, to make it be horrible rather than what it actually was. So let's look again at the concept. So let's start with Friday. And Friday is actually the only day of the week that's named after a female.
Oh!
Her name is Freya, and she was the goddess of love, fertility, and sex and marriage and relationships. She was a Norse goddess, and Friday is basically Freya's day.
Oh.
So it's her day, or day of the goddess.
It never occurred to me that she was the only female one. You're right.
So in Norse culture, Fridays were considered good and lucky days, especially to get married, to start relationships, to have a baby. Wow. Because it was Freya's day, and everything the goddess of Freya embodied was supposed to be significant on those days.
In French and the sort of more Latin-y languages, vendredi, I might be wrong, but I think it's Venus, isn't it?
It's Venus Day. So in ancient Greece, Friday is Venus Day. So like Freya, Venus is the goddess of love. And like you said, in French, vendredi references Venus on Friday. And in Latin, it's Dies Veneris. I hope I've said that correct. Again, Venus Day. In ancient Germanic culture, Friday is Frigg's Day. And like Freya and Venus, Frigg was a goddess honoured for love, sexual energy, the cycles of creation, birth and death. So basically, in the past, Fridays were days that were honoured the feminine, that honoured the goddess, life itself, the points of transformation. So all of those things associated, birth, sex, marriage. And Fridays were celebrated as representative of that divine, the magical, the transformative, the changing. You know, we said at the beginning about Fridays being the gateway to the weekend.
Yeah.
Literally were considered gateway days, days where things could be transformed. And they were basically the cyclical essence of the female. It didn't just mean celebrating women, of course, but as we've said before in previous podcasts, women and their bodies were seen as the embodiment of all of these things.
These natural cycles, yeah.
These natural cycles. And so Freya, the goddess, represented that day perfectly, the transformative day. And she was seen as powerful, a wonderful day. And the goddess was worshipped, and women in their bodies at that time had respected statuses in their societies, didn't they? We've talked about that a lot, haven't we? So Friday in the past was a good day, is a good day. It's still Freya's day.
Yeah, let's take back Fridays.
Yeah, and actually I looked up a current reference to this in terms of love and sex, and apparently still in the Jewish culture, Friday is revered as a good day to have sex. It's considered a mitzvah, a good deed, a good act to procreate and be intimate with your partner on a Friday.
Oh, how nice.
So those are some positive things about Friday. So 13 then, again, in Jewish culture, number 13 is a divine number. And it's the age when, again, that transformation.
Bar mitzvahs.
Bar mitzvahs and bat mitzvahs, yeah. When a child is 13, they're considered to have gone past that transformation to be a full member of the Jewish community. And it's celebrated, and it's a huge event, isn't it? And in any, you know, the English language speaking, 13 is the very first year when a child becomes a teenager. Prior to, like we said, patriarchal religions, both Fridays and 13s denoted the transformation, a time of change, and still do. There's still that layover there. Now, in Tibetan culture, 13 is a holy number. It's believed that you can cleanse away all sins with 13 rounds of prayer. So they consider it to be really special number. In numerology, number 13 is sacred. It's a karmic number that represents change and positivity. And it's actually said to be good luck and a number of prosperity. So again, brilliant.
Yeah.
And you'll know this next one as well. So in tarot, the 13th card is death.
Yeah.
As we know, it's not a literal interpretation usually. It means change.
Transformation, exactly.
Transformation. Rebirth, a gate to a new start, a change, and moving on, an altering of status. All of these things, it's not meant to be negative. It's a positive one because that card denotes that sometimes we have to have change to make progress and to develop. You can't have development without change. So that's it's supposed to be really good. 13. So again, ancient Egyptians considered 13 to also be a lucky number. And in the ancient Egyptian philosophy, they saw a ladder as a progression of the soul. And the 13th rung being the pinnacle of that changed, that you changed then from being just a human working your way up your spiritual progression to have achieved heaven and the next step.
Ooh, like enlightenment.
And yeah, or they called it the glorious, desirable transformation.
Oh, even better.
And then something I wanted to tell you, just a quirky thing, and I sent you a picture of this, Dee, so maybe this will be in the show notes. It's a 27,000-year-old carving of what appears to be the goddess or Earth Mother. It's found near the Lascaux caves in France, you know, the ones with all the lovely paintings inside.
Let me just bring it up for our Patreon viewers.
I'll describe it while you're finding it, Dee, then. It's basically a picture, and a carving of, it looks like the classic goddess with the lovely rounded figure. And in her hand, she's holding what looks like a horn, or it could be like an animal horn. It could represent the horn of plenty, but it's clearly a woman, isn't it? If you look really closely, on her horn, it has 13 notches.
Oh, cool.
So along the side of them, it has 13 notches. So again, a reference to 13 now. Does that mean the 13 was significant to previous people? And I think, and I'm going to say yes. To understand better, we need to look at calendars, Dee, and we need to look at the calendars that moved from a pagan philosophy with a 13-month lunar calendar that was followed, from that to a 12-month calendar that's based around the sun. And as we know, the sun is about more male energy. That's what we have got the system now. And this calendar change was thought to have taken place about 45 before Common Era. And the Gregorian calendar that we use today is the sun one, that's 12 months. And that was officially established in the 1500s, though it obviously had been used for a lot longer than that, and is now considered the most accurate of calendars. But prior to that, a 13-monthly or 13-moonly record was kept by people based on the 29.5-ish day cycle of the moon. And basically, there were 13 moons a year. And it was a simpler way of counting, and it was a method that was used at that time. And I think also because it reflected the more of the philosophy of the feminine energy, because as you also know, women generally have 13 menstrual cycles a year.
Mm-hmm.
And I think the goddess is maybe reflecting the calendar, but also reflecting the essence of a female at the same time. So connecting those two concepts of the moon and the female cycle, it would have been obviously observed, wouldn't it?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Made people notice them. As farming became more structured, the moonly cycle, although it was wonderful in the sense that it had a reference of time for everybody, it didn't keep track of the seasons. So if you imagine if you just were tracking the moon, it didn't keep track of when you needed maybe to sow your seeds and etc. The reason I think the 12 sun month calendars were started was because of the farming. But as we've said, women have 13, 29.5-ish menstrual cycles a year, and that would have been noticed. And also the trimesters of a pregnancy are basically 3 trimesters of 13 weeks.
And people very much recorded and were aware of whether their menstrual cycle was linked, like at what phase of the moon they normally got their menstrual cycle, probably as a bit of a way of tracking it.
Yeah. They'll have watched and thought it's coming shortly.
And also there were different beliefs attributed to whether you had your period around the new moon or the full moon. So that was something they were very aware of.
Absolutely. The number 13 then, like Friday, was therefore closely associated with the feminine and the moon. It's only really when the patriarchy, the arrival of the patriarchy and the religions that came along with that became this, as we've talked about on so many occasions, a strategic, and I say strategic because I do believe it was purposeful, dismantling and denying of female power. It was frightening, I'm guessing. But basically, there was reverence for cycles, there were reverence for females, not just as fellow humans, but for the power of their sexuality as well. So we're in times now where the moon was out and the sun was in. You know, it was more of a male power. And one thing I was going to sort of mention at this point was that where the stories in things like the Bible appear, there are only like 2 types of women. There are either the sexually immoral, like Eve and Lilith and Mary Magdalene, who I'm sure she was defamed, or they're sexually innocent and pure, like Mary. Either way, that powerful sexuality and the power of her cycles has been made into something either disgusting or dirty, or she's been completely removed from it, like Mary, who became the virgin.
Yep, the mother and the whore and nothing in between.
Mother, or the virginal mother, or the whore, and nothing in between. And to actually have taken it to the point where Mary had to have been sexually pure to have given birth to God's son Jesus really messed with that concept of the goddess being the vessel of all life, and her cycles and her pregnancies being intricate to the actual philosophy that people were aware of and were, revering. And it got to the point where they said, no, that's sin, that's original sin, and woman is now the host and origin of that original sin.
Yeah, in the Bible also, periods were given to women as punishment for their sin. As
punishment, and birth to be even specifying it has to be painful because you're getting punished for this.
Now listen, sometimes I feel like my period is punishment, but that's for me to decide.
Absolutely.
It's really harmful to... Yeah, it's. I just think it's just really horrible to think of something as beautiful and amazing, as wonderful as our whole reproductive system and abilities.
Yeah.
To call it punishment.
Yeah, the magic it must have seemed like, wow, that, women can birth new life straight out of their own bodies, and how amazing it must have been for them. And like we were saying before, a dangerous time, and the people associated with helping those women at that time had really crucial high status roles, like we talked about cunning women in the past. And all of this was just dragged into an abyss.
And the distancing of men from that whole process by making Joseph not even involved in the birth of his own son, I assume,
Yeah.
in the conceiving of his own son. So just removing, I think that's one of the saddest things.
It is, and it's had long-lasting, long-reaching effect. Even today, women are still, we're still subject to being told about our own bodies and what we can and can't do with them.
I mean, look what happened in the States recently with the revoking the right to have abortions is absolutely.
Yeah, I mean, women, we're still not back to the days of the goddess when we were in charge of our own bodies. And it's had, like you said, long-lasting effects. And it's not just women who are victims of the patriarchy. Like you said,
no,
men have also been kept at a distance from the goddess and from their partners. Look, if you just look at parental leave, for example, it's assumed that men don't need parental leave so much. Why would they need that? That's a woman's job, right?
I know that that's one of the things they're working on, and I hope that it becomes more fair. But yeah, I remember a friend of mine taking 2 weeks parental leave. It's like, yep, that's surely enough time to bond with your newborn child and help your wife out who's just given birth,
Yeah.
And he wanted more, but that was all he was entitled to. So it's really harmful. It separates the sexes, puts this unnecessary divide.
Yeah, puts pressure on men. And there's a lot of talk now around the menopause when I've talked to you about it, Dean, in terms of that. There's a lot of talk, thankfully, going on at the moment. But one of the key crucial things is they're saying this isn't just about the women. This is about the men who live with those women. This is about their lives as well, and how it impacts and affects men.
Mm-hmm.
When women are pregnant, when women have just had babies, when they're menstruating, men are also involved in these processes because they're our life partners as well. The patriarchy isn't just about man bashing, is it? And that's not the point I'm trying to make.
We love men.
We love men.
If there is not equality between the two predominant sexes, I'm going to say genders, there's no hope for non-binary people and trans folk and so forth, because they use the excuse that, because they, we don't even understand the concept of them, or we're getting used to the idea, give us time or whatever. Women have been around as long as men, as, self-identifying women, and they still haven't given us our rights. So
I know
it's a global fight of any minority, any oppressed culture, gender, etc. If there's injustice anywhere, then there's injustice everywhere. So let's work together.
Address it. And maybe actually just rethinking Friday the 13th is a good start.
Good start, yeah. Let's reclaim it.
So let's just reclaim it and let's celebrate it. Next Friday 13th, right? It's January the 13th, 2023.
Mm-hmm.
And taking on board all those concepts of equality and female power. Okay, the ways to celebrate. Okay, so we can think about all the powerful, wonderful women in our lives and that have been alive in life. We can redress some of these things by looking into charities, by signing petitions and things that may have relevance to paternity leave or for work with women, for example.
I want to just slip in a little shout out then to a charity. I just heard, I was listening to a podcast episode. It was a Palestinian podcast called Gaza Guy. Really recommend if you want to hear about life in Gaza. But he was interviewing someone, and my mind has gone blank about her name, but she had set up a charity to help and prevent female genital mutilation. Her charity, the name just stuck with me because I love it. The Avengers.
The Avengers.
I'll put a link in the show notes.
Yeah, please do. So those kind of concepts. So Friday 13th, let's make it a celebration. Let's make it important. Let's remember all those things that we can do. And also, it's a day where they're saying it's for love and sex and fertility. So go for it.
Get it on.
Get it on, yes.
I'm so excited about all the future Friday 13th now. I knew there was a reason I liked them.
Yeah.
I thought I was just rebelling against mainstream culture, but
no, let's smash the patriarchy one Friday at a time.
Yay! That was absolutely amazing. Thank you so much, Michelle. I hope everyone joins us next week for our next episode with Michelle. So thank you so much, Michelle.
Thank you, Dee.
Thank you, everyone, for listening. We'll see you next week. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
We Know the Moon is the official podcast for the Goddess Temple Twickenham. Don't forget, you can find us on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, and Pinterest. You can also visit our website, weknowthemoon.co.uk, for all of our upcoming events and merch. If you sign up for any amount on our Patreon, you'll be able to watch our video recordings of our podcast from season 4 onwards, with all the raw bits. That usually means more swearing. Thanks for listening.